Hiking in Colorado's backcountry had always been a passion of mine. It offered me peace and quiet, a chance to reconnect with nature, and a way to enjoy its beauty away from the chaos of everyday life. I'd often escape to the mountains on weekends, needing a break from my job where I spent my days helping people who couldn't even turn on a computer, let alone use it. That Friday, I left work early, my backpacking gear already packed with food and a small fishing pole for the stream I was heading to. The trail I was aiming for was about 8 miles deep in the mountains, with most hikers stopping halfway at the main campsite. My goal was to go beyond that, deeper into the wilderness. The weather was perfect, a late spring day with clear skies and pleasant temperatures. Most of the snow had melted, leaving behind streams and lakes with plenty of fish. On past trips, I'd fished right at the trailhead and often went back just 3 miles, catching up to 40 nice-sized trout by noon. I'd release most of them unless I planned to stay the night. In that case, I'd keep my limit for dinner and breakfast, but if I didn't catch anything, which rarely happened, I'd be content with oatmeal in the morning and soup for dinner. The walk was peaceful, and every now and then, I'd pause to admire the scenery and snap some photos. I'd learned to always bring my camera, just in case I spotted something special like an elk, bear, or bald eagle. On one memorable occasion, I even saw a mountain lion but decided to keep my distance. After all, they're more dangerous than other wildlife, especially if you're dealing with a protective mother bear or moose. I reached the trailhead around 2 p.m. The beauty of this hike was that it was only 30 minutes from my apartment, and it wasn't a popular spot for most hikers or campers. At the trailhead, I double-checked my gear to make sure everything was secure. I stopped briefly at the National Forest restroom, filled up my overnight tag, and then set off on the trail. The path started easy, but I knew the way back would be challenging. It began with a 250-yard climb up a ridge before dropping 600 yards into the valley below. Once at the bottom, I was greeted by a beautiful stream running northward. I could either follow the stream for a mile to a small town or turn upstream, where I was heading. The downstream path ended after only 200 yards, with thick foliage making it hard to navigate. I'd tried it a couple of times while fishing, but it was too much work to ford the stream and continue. At the base of the valley, I always stopped to admire a pool at the intersection of the two trails. It was a quiet, serene spot that always made me smile, and I'd take a moment to check the water's flow before moving on. After a short break, I chose the right-hand path, which would take me deeper into the valley where I planned to camp for the weekend. On a typical weekend, you'd occasionally cross paths with horseback riders or casual hikers, many of whom brought their dogs. Most people would stop around the 4-mile mark at a large campsite, a popular and spacious area that I thought had become overcrowded over the years. It was a beautiful meadow, though, with an old cabin standing nearby. Years ago, there had been a small village further up the trail, but it had long since disappeared, either claimed by time or scavengers. This wasn't where I was headed, though. My destination was farther, to a little lake at the stream's headwaters, where I planned to fish and enjoy the solitude for the weekend. On this particular day, I kept my pace steady and didn't stop often to admire the scenery. I only took quick breaks to sip some water, knowing that if I kept moving, I could reach my destination before nightfall without losing much time. As I walked, I found myself lost in thought, reflecting on what life could have been like if I had faced some challenges as a youth. Hiking and camping trips often gave me a chance to think about the paths I never took. I had always felt like I should have been born female, and at one point, I almost told my family about these feelings. But this was the late 1970s, a time when society wasn't kind to men who wanted to be women, or even to those who were homo. I knew that my family would never understand, and I feared they would be devastated by my revelation. So, I kept quiet and buried the thoughts. Over the years, I often wondered how different my life might have been had I been born female or had I shared my true feelings with my family. But it was all a moot point. I had been born with a body that was anything but feminine, with the build of a linebacker and a distinctly masculine face. Instead, I threw myself into hobbies like heavy metal guitar and singing, and with my long hair, some women even compared me to Fabio. I found that odd, as I never thought he was particularly good-looking, but apparently, many women saw him as a heartthrob. I reached Forgotten Lake at the headwaters of the Little Tomlinson River around 6 p.m. After finding the perfect spot for my tent and campfire, I made sure the fire complied with national forest regulations, just enough for cooking, warmth, and light while I was awake. With the camp set up, I grabbed my fishing gear and headed to the lake. In about 40 minutes, I caught 4 beautiful 16-inch rainbow trout, perfect for my dinner. I returned to camp, fried the fish, and paired it with potatoes, enjoying a quiet meal. It was a peaceful evening, just as I had hoped. By the time dinner was finished, darkness had settled in. I cleaned up, making sure all food was stored far enough away to avoid attracting bears. I hung my food in a tree, out of reach, as a precaution. I knew that if I neglected this, I might find myself as the bear's next meal. Around 10 p.m., I let the fire burn down and crawled into my sleeping bag. Even with the fire's crackling embers, I could hear a coyote's distant howl and the hoot of an owl in the night. The moon was barely visible, adding to the darkness, but the clear sky allowed for a perfect view of the stars. Where I lived, city lights usually obscured the stars, but out here, far from the city, the night sky was unspoiled and brilliant. The only thing that could have made the night even more serene would have been a gentle rain against my tent, but the weather was expected to stay clear and warm, possibly reaching the low 80s. Not that I minded. I loved the sound of rain in nature, not to mention the fresh smells it brought with it. Around 10:30 or 11 p.m., as I began to drift off, a bright light appeared over the lake, so intense that it illuminated my entire campsite. I couldn't think of anything that could cause such a bright light, except maybe a helicopter. I quickly scrambled out of my tent, threw on my pants, shoes, and a t-shirt. There was barely a sound, just a faint whistling noise, as the light lingered in the sky for several minutes. I realized I had to capture this moment on camera. No one would believe me without proof. My camera, which could double as both a regular and video camera, was my go-to for moments like this. I like to call it my paparazzi because it could take night shots and zoom in on objects over 200 yards away with perfect detail. I took a few pictures of the light through the trees and recorded a short video. As I narrated what I was seeing, the footage could have easily been mistaken for a Blair Witch-style movie, with the camera close to my face as I tried to capture the mysterious light. Time seemed to freeze as I made a decision, against my better judgment, to walk toward the lake for a closer look. As I neared Forgotten Lake, I saw a large, saucer-shaped craft hovering about 50 feet above the water. A series of multicolored lights flickered along its edges, and a beam of light emanating from below shifted in color every few seconds. I knew I had undeniable proof of a UFO, and there was no way anyone could dismiss it as a hoax. After snapping a few photos, I decided to record a video, speaking as I did so. The sound near the lake was noticeable but not overpowering. As I began speaking, I realized the craft or its occupants might have heard me. Just as I captured 30 seconds of new footage, a beam of light shot from the craft and struck me directly. The camera slipped from my hands as I panicked, feeling the instinct to escape. My mind raced, recalling movies like Fire in the Sky and imagining the horrors Travis Walton must have experienced. But there was one issue: I couldn't move a muscle. The light enveloped me for several seconds, and I noticed I was slowly being lifted off the ground, drifting toward the craft. My heart pounded in my chest, the noise from the craft growing louder. It was a deep hum that, if I could have, I would have covered my ears to block out the deafening sound. With each passing second, I felt myself being drawn closer to the craft, now suspended above the lake. If the beam released me, the fall would have been catastrophic. It felt like an eternity as I neared the craft, but in reality, only a few minutes passed. I was pulled beneath it and saw a panel open on the bottom, drawing me inside. Inside the craft, the light was so bright I could barely see. The next thing I remember is blacking out. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in a cramped chamber, too small to sit up, barely large enough to turn over. The space reminded me of the tiny sleeping quarters found in some Japanese hotels. I tested the walls around me and discovered they were solid, except for one. This wall had some give, like a membrane. That's when I realized I had been stripped of my clothes and noticed my skin felt painfully sunburned, likely a result of the beam that had drawn me onto the ship. A fleeting thought to scream crossed my mind, but I quickly dismissed it. There was no one here to help, no escape. Instead, I pushed against the membrane with my legs, bracing myself with my back and shoulders. The membrane gave way slightly but didn't tear or rip open. Feeling claustrophobic, I began kicking the membrane and yelling for release. My actions finally drew attention. The membrane split in the middle and opened along the sides. Standing before me were what I later believed to be greys. They were tall, about 6 to 6.5 feet, with large heads, oversized eyes, small slits for a nose and mouth, and long, thin fingers. I attempted to kick one of them, but their response was shockingly swift. They grabbed both of my legs and pulled me out of the small chamber. I struggled, kicking and fighting, but despite their slender builds, the creatures were surprisingly strong. The two of them dragged me down a brightly lit corridor, and I fought to break free. At one point, I managed to free a leg and kicked one of them hard enough to break free of the other's grip. This seemed to anger them. They quickly restrained me, and just as I tried to gain my footing, I was struck hard in the back of the head. The pain was overwhelming, and I lost consciousness. I'm not sure how long I was out, but when I came to, I found myself strapped to a cold metal table. Visions of fire in the sky flooded my mind as I saw strange, unfamiliar devices hovering above me. I screamed, only to have a bitter, ember substance forced into my mouth. It made me gag instantly. I have a very sensitive gag reflex. In that moment, I truly believed I was going to die on that table. A smaller gray, different from the two that had brought me from my cell, appeared above me and lowered a device toward my mouth. It resembled a dental tool used to hold the mouth open, but it was much larger. As the gray attempted to insert the device into my mouth, I gagged uncontrollably, struggling to breathe. The pressure was excruciating, and I feared my mouth might be torn open. Once the device was secured, a long tube was lowered and shoved down my throat. The sensation was painful, as if it were tearing through my throat and larynx. I was strapped so securely that I couldn't move, my limbs immobilized. It was useless to try to struggle. The pain from the tube intensified, making it nearly impossible to scream. Soon, 3 more smaller greys appeared and began lowering more devices near me. My peripheral vision caught glimpses of them working on various parts of my body. This felt like a nightmare, and I was gripped by fear as I realized this was all happening to me. A new device hovered near my right eye, resembling a large needle. The sight terrified me. Just as it neared, I squeezed my eyes shut in panic. One of the greys forced my eyelids open with another device. I braced myself for the needle, but instead, the device pressed down on my eye, causing my contact lens to pop out, and everything became blurry in that eye. The needle moved closer again, and I tried to scream louder. But the terror overwhelmed me, and my body could take no more. I blacked out, unsure whether it was the creatures or my fear that had caused me to lose consciousness. When I awoke again, I was back in the small cell, weakened and unable to make a sound. My throat ached from the tube, and a severe headache prevented me from moving. I blacked out once more. I woke up again on a large table, with the 4 smaller greys standing over me. I was strapped down, unable to move, and I could feel the device on my mouth pulling it open. Then, I saw another device being lowered toward my body. It looked like a mosquito proboscis attached to a larger tube. I had a bad feeling about what it was for. When the device was placed on my body, the pain was unbearable. It felt like it was burning as it was pushed into me, and the vacuum attached to it made it feel as though my insides were being sucked out. The pain was worse than the earlier procedure with my eye, but somehow, I managed to remain conscious. The device remained attached for what felt like hours, and the sensation of being drained was overwhelming. As the device continued, one of the greys lowered a membrane over my head, suffocating me like a plastic bag. I screamed, but my voice was muffled and weak, as I couldn't escape or fight back. I blacked out once more. When I regained consciousness, the membrane was gone, but the device was still attached to me. A small grey stood near my chest, lowering another device. I couldn't understand what it was, but soon I felt a burning sensation, as though I were being cut by a laser. The pain intensified, and I screamed, but the tube in my throat made it difficult to vocalize. A liquid was pumped down my throat, burning worse than any acid reflux I had ever felt. The pain felt like a heart attack, and my chest burned with every breath. The only relief was that this new pain seemed to dull everything else, making the previous sensations feel distant and less intense. I must have blacked out again, because when I regained consciousness, I found myself back in my small cell. I didn't have the strength to fight, to escape, or even to scream. The next time I came to, I was being dragged down the hallway again by two large greys. I could barely move or make a sound, and I knew it was pointless to resist. A grim certainty settled over me. I was going to die here, trapped in this alien vessel, subjected to their experiments. The greys didn't have to travel far. They hoisted me onto a table and began strapping me in once more. As they did, I saw my one chance to fight back. I swung my right arm with all my strength, landing a solid blow to the face of the grey on my left. It went down hard, and I could feel the impact as it crumpled beneath me. But before I could attack the one on my right, I felt an invisible force strike me in the head, stunning me, and leaving me unable to move. The grey I had struck was quickly lifted by two other large greys who entered the room. A smaller grey hovered over me and lowered the mouth device into position, while the larger grey that had been on my right began securing me to the table. The mouth device was inserted again, pulling my mouth wide open. This time, I didn't see a tube. Instead, a needle-like device appeared, moving toward the center of my forehead, between my eyes. I tried to struggle once more, but it was futile. At least I had the small satisfaction of knowing I had taken one of them down before they took me. Despite the grey's strength and dexterity, they were surprisingly fragile. The device soon reached my forehead and began to push into my skull. The pain was indescribable, like the worst migraine imaginable. Once the device was in place, I felt my thoughts, memories, desires, and everything in between being read by these beings for purposes I couldn't comprehend. The pain became unbearable, and I blacked out again. When I regained consciousness, I was still strapped to the table, but the mouth device was gone, and no greys were in sight. I must have laid there for over 2 hours before they returned. Soon, new devices and needles were lowered onto me. I was too weak to react, unable to make any noise or even move. The greys had won, and death seemed inevitable. Lying on the table, I had a vision of what my life could have been had I expressed my feelings of being born in the wrong body. It was a strange thought, but I realized it might be the last I would ever have. The 4 smaller greys lowered new devices onto me, but I had no idea what they would do next. It felt as though they had already done everything to me during my captivity. I closed my eyes, resigned to my fate. I had lost my fight and my will to go on. I could feel many new devices attaching to me, and I winced slightly with each one. As I thought about my life and my family, a thought suddenly entered my mind: do not worry, soon all will be good, and you will be free. I thought to myself, yeah, free to let my spirit go and enter the netherworld. If this isn't hell, then I know the afterlife will be a walk in the park compared to what I've just endured. Then another thought came to me: do not fear us, we mean you no harm, only to correct your imperfections. Correct my imperfections? What was this creature talking about? I felt a burning liquid being pumped into my body, and it felt as though my entire system was convulsing. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I blacked out once more. I felt someone shaking me, and a faint male voice asked, Miss, are you all right? Can you hear or understand me? I slowly began to open my eyes, but the light was blinding. I moved my right arm over my face to shield my eyes from the brightness. I groaned, my voice barely audible. The male voice spoke again: Miss, are you going to be okay? Bring me a blanket and some water for this poor woman. Woman? Why does he keep calling me woman? Is there someone else here I don't know about? As I slowly opened my eyes, I saw a park ranger kneeling over me. I tried to sit up, but he gently pushed me back down. It's okay, miss. You're going to be fine. Do you know where you are? Miss? Why do you keep calling me miss? I'm as male as you are, I said weakly. Last I remember, I was at Forgotten Lake on Friday, June 1st, 2007. The ranger looked at me, clearly surprised. Ma'am, you're at Beaver Dam Lake. Forgotten Lake is 25 miles northeast of here. And it's June 9th, 2007. You must be really confused. But since you think you're at Forgotten Lake, did you happen to see someone there, about 6 feet tall, 220 pounds, with long dark brown hair, around 43 years old? Sounds like me you're describing. I replied, still in a daze. Here, have a drink of water and take these, you'll feel better soon. He handed me a drink and 2 pills, then covered me with a blanket. You know, it's not a good idea to be out in these mountains without proper clothing, let alone without any at all. I sat up, took the water, and swallowed the pills. My head's a bit fuzzy. The last thing I remember was seeing a strange light over Forgotten Lake. After that, I'm not sure I should talk about it. You already think I'm crazy, judging by the look on your face. Well, ma'am, you're clearly not 6 feet tall, 220 pounds, or a 43-year-old man. The only thing you share with the person who went missing at Forgotten Lake is the long dark brown hair. And I've never found an unclothed woman running around the Rocky Mountains in all my 10 years of service. I've seen a lot, but this is a first. I thought to myself, not male? This guy must be out of his mind. Maybe my terrifying experience was still going on. I reached up to my chest, and sure enough, I felt the soft contours of chests. Pulling away the blanket, I saw 2 firm, well-formed female chests. What else had changed? Slowly, I moved my hand down to my lower body, and instead of the familiar male anatomy, I felt a warm, wet opening where my male part used to be. I think I'm going to throw up. I gasped, and before I could stop myself, I was vomiting on the ground beside me. This was a nightmare. After I finished vomiting, the ranger handed me a canteen of water to rinse my mouth and take another sip. They said they were going to make things right. I mumbled, half to myself and half loud enough for him to hear. This must be what they meant when they said they were going to correct my imperfections. By now, a crowd had gathered around us, and I could see confusion on their faces. What are you talking about, miss? What do you mean, correcting imperfections? I looked into the ranger's eyes and said, on Friday, June 1st, I went camping at Forgotten Lake by myself. I filled out a form saying I'd be there until Sunday, June 3rd. While I was there, I saw the strangest thing I've ever witnessed in my life. If you look by the lake, you'll find a Panasonic DMC FZ50S. It was my digital camera, and I recorded everything that happened that day. You may think I'm crazy, but it's the truth, and this camera is proof of who I am. People started murmuring amongst themselves, clearly unsure whether I was delirious or mad. The ranger said, "Miss, I think we should get you to a hospital to get checked out. You seem a little out of it." I am not crazy. I screamed. My name is David Waddle. I was born November 4th, 1963, and I recited my SSN and address. The ranger gave me another confused look. That's strange. How do you know this information about the man who went missing at Forgotten Lake a week ago? Because I am that person. Or I was that person, I said. On June 1st, I saw something strange over the lake. I went to investigate and took pictures with my camera. I can show you where I dropped it if you want. That strange event was a UFO, I swear to God, I'm not lying or dreaming this up. As I looked around at the faces of the crowd, I could see their confusion and hear their whispers as they debated what I had said. The ranger, still skeptical, said, "Miss, I think we should get you checked out at a hospital. You need help." I could see the disbelief in their eyes as they continued to murmur among themselves, unsure of what to make of my words. The UFO beamed a light onto me, dragged me into their craft, and ran numerous tests on me. It was the worst experience of my life. The next thing I knew, the beings aboard, the Greys, I think they're called, said they were going to correct my imperfections. That's when I woke up here, with you shaking me awake, and realizing I'm clearly a female, not the male I was just a week ago. At that moment, I heard a helicopter fly overhead and hover above me, lowering a basket to the ground. Two men, possibly paramedics, approached. As they did, the ranger and one of the men pushed me to the ground and injected a needle into me. I tried to fight them off, but it was clear these men had the strength to overpower me. "Why don't you believe me?" I shouted in desperation. "I'm telling the truth. I'm not crazy." Panic and tears overwhelmed me as I feared what they might do next. The shot the paramedic gave me must have been a tranquilizer, as I soon felt weak and drowsy. The helicopter's basket was lowered beside me, and the ranger and the paramedics lifted me into it, strapping me in to be hoisted into the air. I'm not sure how long I was out, but when I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, and a sheriff's officer was standing outside my door. A nurse was next to my bed, checking the floor. As soon as she saw me stir, she looked into my eyes and said, "Everything's going to be all right now. You're safe, and we're making sure to take care of any health concerns. The only health issue I have right now is that no one believes me, and I'm not the person I was a week ago," I said to her. The nurse smiled and checked her records before leaving the room. It wasn't long before two men in black suits and sunglasses entered my room and sat down. The sheriff's officer closed the door behind them, and I heard the lock click. "We found the camera you mentioned," one of the men said. "There's nothing on it. However, we find it strange that your fingerprints match those of the man who's been missing from that location for over a week now. Care to explain?" "I know what I recorded on my camera was there when everything happened," I said, my voice rising in panic. "I even checked the first few pictures to make sure they turned out. As for why my fingerprints match the missing man's, it's because he and I are the same, or we're the same. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm telling you the truth." I explained everything that had happened with the alien craft, and both men took notes. After about 2 hours, they got up to leave, saying, "We'll be in touch." Once they left, a doctor entered the room with a warm smile. "I bet you're starving," he said. "But first, we need to have a nurse draw some blood, and another doctor wants to see you. Once that's done, we'll get you some food, and maybe you can take a shower to feel better." "Yeah, that would be nice," I said, smiling back. Just before the doctor left, a nurse came in to draw some blood. She wasn't in the room long, but as she was finishing, a man in a suit entered and sat next to my bed. "How are you feeling today? By the way, we don't know your name, miss. You claim to be David. Would you prefer I call you that, or is there another name you'd like to go by?" "David or D is fine," I replied, just as the nurse finished taking my blood. "Please close the door on your way out, Ms. Ellis, if you don't mind," the man said. The nurse nodded and left, closing the door behind her. The man stayed in my room for about 2 hours, asking me many questions, many of which were repetitive but phrased differently. I could tell he was trying my patience with the constant questioning about who I was, who I believed I was, and other typical psychiatric evaluations. When he finished, he said, "You do seem confused, but I believe you're speaking what you believe to be the truth." "Hell yes, I am on both accounts. Why wouldn't I be confused?" I snapped. "I went into the mountains for a camping trip as a man, and a week later, I'm a female, and everyone thinks I'm crazy. I assure you, I'm not crazy, and what I'm telling everyone is the truth. I may have always wanted to be a woman, but I never would have done anything to change it. If you saw my former self, or pictures of me, you'd know why. I wouldn't have been an attractive woman, and I would have been bigger than many men. So, hell yes, I'm confused. We're investigating what you're saying, and if it's true, everything will be fine. But if you're trying to deceive us, you won't like the consequences." The doctor smiled at me as he left the room. He was gone for about 10 minutes when a nurse entered with a tray of soup and toast. It wasn't gourmet, but after being half-starved, it tasted pretty amazing. After I finished eating, the nurse returned to collect my plate and unstrap me from the bed. "The doctor said you can take a shower now, but you'll be supervised." I rolled my eyes but agreed, and the nurse helped me off the bed and toward the shower. We stopped as we walked past the bathroom mirror. Everyone had been calling me Miss, Female, Ma'am, and Woman, but I hadn't seen what I looked like yet. Staring back at me was an incredibly attractive woman, about 24 years old. Her dark brown hair fell past her shoulders, and her steel blue eyes stood out vividly. She was about 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighing somewhere around 125 pounds, maybe less. Her figure was stunning, with a chest that appeared to be a well-formed C-cup. I couldn't help but admire my reflection. This was how I had always dreamed of looking. I reached up to touch my lips, full and natural, not exaggerated like some celebrity. My skin had a warm tan, and my fingers were slim with beautifully manicured nails. Turning to examine my body, I noticed my shapely, well-formed hips. I had a fleeting thought that keeping men away might become quite the challenge. I quickly stepped into the shower, enjoying the warm water as I washed myself and my hair. It felt amazing. As I bathed, I couldn't help but explore my new body, feeling a strange curiosity about the sensations. I even touched my new female part, and the feeling immediately excited me. The shower lasted around 30 minutes. Once I finished, I dried off and had the chance to brush my teeth and comb my hair. I noticed how perfectly straight and white my teeth were, aside from the gold crown on my upper right molar. It seemed the aliens had indeed corrected what I had once thought were my imperfections. Once I was done, I was given a soft robe to wear as I sat around. It was starting to feel like bedtime, but when the nurse returned, she assisted me back into bed. I had almost gotten enough sleep, but the nurse administered a shot through my fore, and before long, I was asleep again. When I woke up the next morning, the nurse brought me a breakfast of scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, orange juice, and some hot tea, which tasted wonderful. After I finished eating, I was allowed to get out of bed. As I sat watching the news, a man in a suit entered the room and sat down, smiling at me. "Well, some of your story seems to hold up. We found that your DNA matches David Waddle's perfectly. You're even a match to his mother and siblings as a child. Your dental records don't completely match, but your fillings and crowns are an exact match to those of David Waddle. And your fingerprints are almost a perfect match to his, just smaller. How this is possible, we don't know. Finally, your physical evaluation came back clean. I think you're free to go home." Free to go home? I thought. Where was home, though? If I couldn't even convince people of who I was, how could my family believe me? I asked the man about it, and he responded, "You're related to David Waddle in some way. You must be family. So, wherever he lived, that's where you're going, and what he owned should now belong to you as his family." With a smile, the man left the room. Not long after, the nurse brought in a pair of jeans, a blouse, a bra, panties, tennis shoes, and socks for me to wear. I was soon dressed and ready to check out. All of my belongings from my trip to Forgotten Lake were returned to me, including my camera. However, I couldn't help but notice that my 2 GB memory card was missing. I suspected that the government had taken it to prevent me from spreading any evidence of the alien spacecraft. This new life was bound to be interesting. I was finally the woman I had always dreamed of becoming, but now came the challenge of convincing my family that I was truly who I claimed to be. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe, just maybe, it could be. I loaded up my truck and headed home, ready to begin my new life. I just hoped I would never have to relive the terror I experienced during my abduction by the alien craft. Though, in the end, they had done me a huge favor, I wouldn't wish that kind of experience on anyone, ever. If you appreciated this story and wish to show your support, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel.